Okay, go for it.
Okay, this gentleman was born and raised in the Bay Area. Formerly, he was the founder of a startup in the mobile retail space. Once it got acquired, he had the opportunity to work with and lead technical teams at great brands like Google, Gap, Old Navy, Verizon, HuffPo, Yahoo, Allstate, Kaiser Permanente, Stanford, and PG&E in the spaces of mobile web and UX innovation and digital transformation. He uses all of his skills for technical UX coaching to move technology and initiatives forward. However, he can add value with new technologies and innovative user experiences. And that's really what drives him. He loves the uncharted territory. That's his favorite place to go. He believes that an optimistic attitude and willingness to have a beginner mindset can take you far. He loves drinking tea and sometimes coffee. And this past year, he's really been enjoying rowing. His other hobbies are reading any comic book he can get his hands on, helping startups, and he also likes to sew. So, with any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the great Curtis Pope.
Thank you so much for that introduction. That's now I have to live up to it. Thank you so much. I'll share a slide deck real quick that actually outlines my talk here that I'm giving. So the title of this talk really is Writing for the Future: content over context, really. Sorry, do you guys see gray bars over this? I just want to make sure you can see everything. We're good to go?
Yes.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
So tonight I want to talk a little bit about some of the humble beginnings of writing on the web. And, I don't want to go too deep into the history because you're all writers. You all know the history. You know what value the printed page and the well thought out phrase can have upon the public. Now, you all, as I understand it, are content writers or technical writers, really. And the way that I see that is technical writing is so instrumental, not just from, writing manuals or procedural documents, but really for the way that people should perceive what they're interacting with, whether it's a technology product, a physical product like a water bottle, a telephone, or even just a tool that they can use to build something or create the next experience for the public. So let me tell you a little bit about me first, and then we'll go into some of the things that I'm bringing to this talk tonight. So started out in 1993. I've been a lifelong comic book reader, as Richard mentioned. And so that qualifies me completely to talk to you all because I read comic books. The stellar writing that comic books provide, besides the bow and pow and the bang, is it's really about emotion. I would even characterize it as really soap operas for boys. And the way that I see comic book writing, the lens that I saw it through was so instrumental to the way that I perceived different interactions with people, and also how to get things done and how to not overly assert yourself in order to make things happen in the world. And of course, to envision the world that you wanted to see. So that really resonated with me with comic books. But throughout my history, I've touched and been interactive with the media, specifically writing. In 1998 to 2000, I did the first yearbook that was completely created digitally. In 2001, I had my very first internship ever out of school, which was at the Fresno Bee. And one of the instrumental times that I was doing a lot of grunt work, by the way. I wasn't doing anything like, I wasn't a cub reporter or anything, but I got a chance to really get to know the daily goings on of very talented writers, whether they be sports writers or just copy editors even, right? Those folks that would take an editorial eye to writers that were under pressure of deadline or they had to get something out and they wanted to get a thought across. Editors were incredibly instrumental in that process. Before then, again, comic books kind of had me feeling like editors were just people that decided who would work on a book or who would collaborate. But seeing it in an actual newsroom, especially around the events of 9/11, that was really where I saw how instrumental the news media was. And that always, even to this day, it still resonates with me. In 2015 through 2018, I was involved in a comic book company. They were a digital comic book company called Comic Blitz. It was the Netflix of comics. We sold that property in 2018. I invested in the company and also helped them strategically in 2015. We sold it in 2018. It was kind of a heartbreaker because that was close to my heart. However, I also realized how powerful the printed page going to digital truly was. Now, throughout all this time, from around 1998 to even up to now, I had been crafting experiences on the web for different clients. Some people wanted brochure websites. Some people wanted full e-commerce websites. And I was there to, of course, take their money and do the thing that I do. But later, a few years later in 2016 and 2017, even down to 2018, really, I worked with Verizon Digital Media. Now, this sounds like a long, dumb name, but you probably all recognize Verizon. Well, Verizon had decided that they wanted to get into the content game, as it's called. And so what they were doing was they had bought properties like AOL, which owned Huffington Post and owned, I think at some point they owned Engadget, a bunch of tech blogs. That was kind of their bread and butter at the time. They had really started to really go into customized content and trying to lure people to advertisers that way. Because, like most businesses out there, especially when you're dealing with media, it's very advertiser focused. I got a chance to work with folks from Huffington Post all the way out to Complex Media, which they had acquired for about 51%. But I also got a chance to see behind the scenes how media companies and how content was such a vital part of their business model. And I've actually seen the same thing repeated over and over. Many of you are probably familiar with the Warner Brothers and also Discovery. They merged companies, and now they're some huge media conglomerate. Now, the problem that a lot of media companies face is that there's just not enough content, meaning that now they have to dig even deeper because the cost to produce a television show or what they call scripted media, where you have writers, you have producers, you have lighting people, you have camera people, you have a set, that cost has skyrocketed astronomically to where now a basic sitcom that used to be on in the 80s that cost somewhere around $400,000 to $500,000 to produce. That means to film the episodes, hire the talent, do all the things and all that for $400,000 a week, now has skyrocketed to something like $2.8 million per week to shoot a basic television show like a This Is Us, right? So you're seeing the costs rise astronomically. So what does that mean? Well, that means that they need to now dig deeper, meaning that they, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a moment, but that means that they have to dig deeper in order to find stories. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that. So remind me if I forget, we're talking about telling stories. Now, in 2020 to 2021, I worked with a company called Media Monks, where we hired a ton, and I mean a ton, of content writers. Those are folks that, let's just say, for instance, you're the CEO of a company and you are looking to look like a swell person to the public. You need someone to craft some witty 5-paragraph article to post on LinkedIn or to your personal company blog or whatnot. You need someone to almost act as a speech writer. And that's what we were using content writers to do in one aspect. But on the other side, we would be contracted by companies that were trying to up their social media presence. Companies like, and you'll see it in the media, you'll see Wendy's, you'll see Burger King, you'll see all these different ice cream companies even they hire people to write content for their social media following, their Twitter posts, their Instagram posts and videos. They're hiring people to do these things because it is a talent. It is something that a few years ago, it was looked at as, oh, people are just goofing off in this thing. But now it's a true profession. And there's what I've seen from talented writers like yourself in the traditional sense is a lot of change, a lot of churn, and a lot of kind of, well, what does the future mean for valid writers, folks that know how to craft a story? They know grammar. I say they know grammar. They have an exceptional command of grammar, punctuation, and all the like. They know the difference between there, and there. They know the difference between to, and to. They know these things, right? And that's just a small microcosm of the disconnect between content writers today and content or traditional writing as you all know it. So enough about me. That's my origin story, right? So now let's talk a little bit of history, okay? Now remember, this is all about telling stories. This is the craft that we're all in, whether we're doing it via a mobile app and we're posting social media stories, whether we are, developing apps for phones like I do, we're telling a story, whether we're producing a movie or a documentary or a short form video, we are all in the business of telling stories, right? Even from the most boring story to the most exciting, draft of a screenplay that you can ever think of. We're all in the business of telling stories. But how we tell stories is so different and it's so unique, but it also is meant to grab people, to really help them to see, or it really helps them to push forward their emotions, for them to be vulnerable in that space with us as we're writing the stories that we're writing. So I'm going to tell you a few digital waves that I've been personally, because again, I know this is saying print press to digital. And the only reason I say that is because within my lifetime, I actually remember running a printing press. So that was part of my coming into the space, just running printing presses in my high school. So that I count, but I'll tell you the significant waves that I've seen, meaning that we went from a traditional print medium to a digital medium. So of course, it starts with Web 1.0, right? And many of us probably remember this. This was around the mid to late 90s. We had what was called the Web 1.0 days. And that was really when web pages were all the rage. Everyone wanted a web page. We didn't know what we wanted to use these web pages for. And trust me, I know, because there were businesses contacting me and ringing my phone off the hook as a teenager. And I would answer and they would say, well, I want a web page. Okay, well, what is that? Well, what do you want on the web page? I don't know. I just need one because, I have a domain name now. Or some would even call and say, I need a domain name. So again, this really dramatically shifted everyone's thought process to where they felt like they could reach a broader audience by creating a website. That was going to be the starting point for them. And then, of course, it was all about sales. And many folks saw the Web 1.0 days as really a digital cash register. How correct and also how wrong we were. Web 1.5, as I'm calling it, and you'll never hear Web 1.5, was the days of MySpace and Ultima Online. MySpace, to say the very least, it was a place where people could connect. They could edit their own page and their own profile. They could put witty remarks. They could even craft stories there and let people know how great of a writer they were. They were marketing to their friends. They were marketing to their family, and they were marketing to the world. They were about to really be on the cusp of letting people know hidden talents that people had that were never discovered previous to them. So MySpace was clearly instrumental in that. Now, Ultima Online, why do I mention this? Well, Ultima Online was, it was really one of the first video games that used very, very deep and expansive writing to lure the game players. meaning that many people played this game. And if you look it up, Ultima Online, a really, really great game. I've only played it a few times and I'm not a gamer, but it was great for me at the time. Also another game, which was called StarCraft, which you could play with people all over the internet. You could play all these games in these huge, expansive ways. And what was key was that it was telling a story. It was taking you into the story. It was immersing you into the story and you were helping tell the story and guide the characters. Again, writing has its place. And sometimes we need to realize that writing is so instrumental to the human experience as well. And of course, right after that, that brings us to the Web 2.0 days. That's blogs and social media. And I'll say it's Web 2.0 mainly because that's where it really reached that fever pitch. That was when it started to really make a difference, meaning that everyone from Fortune 500 CEOs to celebrities would craft blogs. They would have blog posts. You would see, hey, go check out my blog. At the time, there was not really a lot of money in blogs, but everyone knew that you had to have a blog. Much like in the early mid to late 90s, everyone knew you had to have a web page. So I call this kind of the second coming, or the second kind of breath of fresh air, because now people were really influenced to go and speak their voice. And now they had better tools. You had WordPress, you had Blogger, you had so many different tools to where you could easily spin up a page, much like you had MySpace, and you can tell people what's on your mind and really get a story out there. Sometimes they were great stories, sometimes not so great. So again, your mileage will vary there. So why am I talking about the printing press to digital? Because in every single one of these waves, it's been claimed that this is going to be the death of traditional long form writing. At some point, even traditional media has made this claim so many times, but you know what keeps happening? Traditional long form writing keeps coming back. It will never leave us as long as we have historical records, as long as we have a curiosity about how stories really went. Writers are going to be essential to that process. And that's not the only place. We're going to talk a little bit about the future of writing as I see it. And again, I could be right on the cusp of something, as I said in my little intro piece. But again, our mileage may vary. We're going to see a little bit of transition as we've seen it. So I talk about the history. Now let's talk about the future of writing. But is it really writing? Well, that's a question for each one of you all as writers to define and also understand. Some folks, it's funny, about 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a content writer, and they are doing blurbs for advertisement. They're doing what we call like kind of mock-up work, right? So when you're trying to pitch a client like a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola, you'll do little blurbs like jingles. You'll say, hey, here's the ad copy that goes in this actual ad. Do you like it? No. Okay, we're going to tweak it 1,000,000 times until you like it. So all of these things, this is what they do on a daily basis. And so I asked them, well, what does the future of writing look like? And what do you think of creating content for social media and doing what they call user-generated content, right? Again, we talked about how the traditional media, they now have to dig deep, right? They now have to dig deep. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. And it surprised me what that content writer's response was. They said, and keep in mind, this is what they do all day long. They said, that is not real writing. I don't feel like that's real writing. I went to school for journalism. I went to NYU. I don't want to define my career by writing blurbs on social media or crafting the next Kylie Jenner Instagram post. And I thought about that, you know, because I think they have the right to feel that way. But then the other half of my mind, the innovator side, thinks, well, is that a limiting belief? Is that something where maybe this person hasn't caught up to what the current future is? And I know it's hard to catch on to a trend and just go with it completely, but have they really thought about what the future of their space looks like? And I don't think so. I think that there's a ton of space for traditional writers in this space still. I think that now we have so many more tools for us to put our thoughts, craft others' vision, and also continue to tell great stories. And I'm going to talk about that. So as I mentioned before, content companies, media companies, you'll have seen in the past 5 years, many of those companies that were conglomerates, now they've kind of spun off their media parts, right? Because that is a huge, or their film and TV companies, or they've spun out their blogging platforms or other things, right? Verizon, as I mentioned, when I was there, they had all these content companies. Now they've completely sold that off. And now they want to kind of remain in the wireless world and do some other things, right? So you see these transitions every so often because content is very valuable, but it has a long associated cost, meaning that it costs a lot of money to make really good writing come to the masses, but not so much anymore. So they've dug deep, and some of these media companies are now doing what they call unscripted media, which means that you can do a lot of, hey, let me follow you with my iPhone, and I will capture your every movement during the day. And then we will hire an editor, and they will make a documentary, or they'll make a 20-minute show, or they'll make a YouTube show. And guess what? The cost of that is my cost of my iPhone, and I have 1 day, and that's my total cost. So when you're talking about a $2.4 million budget to produce a television show these days, and then in the other hand, you have somebody that, has created content for, roughly $1,200, maybe on the worst day, it just doesn't add up. So you'll see media companies invest heavily into what we're calling user-generated content or unscripted media. That's why you see a huge amount of reality shows. And yet now what they have realized on the production end is that many of those reality television shows now have script writers. They have folks that are traditional writers that at some point they need to stop and say, okay, we're going to stop filming. Can you, instead of saying, I have some cheeseburgers, can you say, I have some really delicious cheeseburgers, So it's like meta acting in a way, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that you're going to see a lot more of that. And I'll tell you why. So years ago, there was a company called Demand Media. Now, some of you may have heard of this company, but it was and this is from 2013, but all through 2011 and 2012, here's what this company was doing. They were what you call a content farm, meaning that they would hire really great English-speaking scholars from companies like Singapore, the Philippines, and even mainland China. And they would basically say, look, I just need some content for, this bottle, this water bottle here. I just need you to give me 5 paragraphs on it, right? And it was so odd because you could provide a 5-sentence outline, and that person would go do research. They would have a deeper understanding of what this water bottle was. They would understand it to a degree to where they can write intelligently for it, and all for the price of less than minimum wage. Now, this sent shockwaves throughout not only the content industry, that means blog posts, traditional media that was now transitioning online, because they were like, well, wait, we just got all these NYU journalism school majors, and we also have a bunch of really great writers that we've supported for so long. Is this the future of media? And what you'll see is, if you really look back in time, traditional media completely balked at this idea. And the reason why is because, in my mind, was because they wanted to protect their interest. And I think this was smart. This was a smart move because we would be where we are now much faster. And we'll talk about where we are now in just a moment. But this was a pivotal time in content. And when I'm talking about content, I am specifically talking to you all about the art and craft of writing. That is what people love. That is what people, it opens their heart to. Whether someone speaks what you wrote or someone reads what you wrote, it opens up the heart and folks really gravitate towards it. But this was a very pivotal moment in journalism, especially because this was the moment where the traditional media could decide whether they were more into getting headlines and clickbait and advertisers, or if they wanted to craft really intelligent, gripping stories. Now, that's not to say that journalism as a whole was not impacted by this. So this business model for demand media, it was sustainable, but only at a certain scale, meaning that basically they lost some money doing this because the people that they were writing for were some of these traditional media companies. And they lost money because people were a little skittish about going with them because traditional media had kind of eaten its tail and said, this is not the future of traditional media. So it was a little bit self-serving, but they have not went away. In fact, they've been acquired, I think, something like 3 times. So there's some value here. Okay. Now let me talk a little bit about some of where we are today. Now today we have a lot of tools that will write for you. Do you know that? And if I'm a writer today and I'm starting my career, I'm not afraid of these, and I'll tell you why. So the sites that I have here are Copy AI, and they're all boasting different things, right? They have an AI, which is a hot buzzword now. And what that means is artificial intelligence, but it's not real intelligence. I'm telling you this as a technologist. It's not real intelligence, and I'll tell you why. Because it has to be trained by humans. It has to have enough humans to tell it what a good story is, for it to understand what a good story is, and for it to craft it. Now, with so many different perspectives in life and in demographics and age and just where people have been, their experiences in life, it's nearly impossible for it to be truly intelligent. It's missing that gusto, that zest, and that's why I don't think that these present a imminent threat. But I will tell you that one day we will have something that matches the thrust of what great writers are doing, but it's not today. it's quite a bit far off. So the sites I'm talking about are Phrase, Copy AI, and Grammarly. Now, Grammarly is kind of a helpful tool because what it does is it kind of proofreads what you're doing, and it does provide a little bit of rephrasing so that you can craft a really great email, right? And then Phrase is more of a straight up AI content generator. So if you tell it, hey, I need one article about ping pong, it will go out, it will scour a number of fed in machine learning documents, and it will say, here's what ping pong is, and here's what I believe it is. And then let me go to Copy AI because it does something very similar. Now, what's missing from all of these approaches is that it still needs human intervention, meaning that you're still going to become a de facto proofreader, meaning that you're going to see some text that just won't make any sense. And you'll see it all over the web as you search and look into these tools, that there have been a lot of near misses. So your mileage may vary, but again, here we have an example here of another piece that's going on, right? So another thing that's going on. So these tools are not to be feared. But another thing that's going on, it's more of a trend, is what they're calling a content calendar. So if you think about some of the world's biggest brands, I'm talking about your Coca-Colas, your Microsofts, your Googles, they need to know when to post to social media. They need to know when to post to a blog. They need to know when to update the website with new copy and new text and new writings, right? They need to have a calendar and something to keep them organized. And they use something similar to this, right? Where there's usually some sort of editor, although they may not even be called an editor. They may be the digital content and media supervisor, right? So again, it's a total shift from traditional media or traditional journalism. And they may be looking at some of these things and saying, okay, we need to post something about what's going on currently. And, you know, someone, you know, and they don't have to have been to journalism school. They don't even have to be a writer. They will go and craft a statement or a tweet or a post, and they will do a meme, or they'll figure out how to reach those people. So they're half marketer, half content provider. And then they'll put it together and they will post on a certain schedule. And what you'll see here is you'll see the title that they use. And some of this stuff is agreed upon weeks before it actually gets posted. And that's why you see things where, you know, there's these big gaffes on Twitter, especially, where they've agreed to, there's like 50,000 cows that get slaughtered. And then it's like, they've agreed to do a hamburger ad or something like that, you know? So you'll see these disconnects all over the place. But again, stop worrying. These are not very good yet. Like, none of this stuff is very good yet. It still requires human intervention, still requires human brains to think through all the troubleshooting and to manage the process. And that's where the great writing comes in, because we're about telling stories. So let me tell you about the several deaths of long form writing. As I mentioned, many traditional media outlets have told you over and over, this new thing is going to be the death of long form media. Medium is going to eradicate everything. You know, there'll be no more newspapers. You know, they're doing all this fear mongering, but newspapers are still here. Long form media is still here and alive and kicking. So I did want to tell a brief story about an app called Circa. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it, but they had a very steep incline and in a very sharp decline. And the reason why is a couple reasons, right? So Circa meant to do a couple things. So this was way before fake news. This was when media outlets were about being first and being right. And they were just saying, oh, yes, I'm just, for example, like yesterday's New York shooting, unfortunately, right? They would say 5 people were killed. And then this media outlet would say, well, 10, by my count. And then another person would say 7 by mine. And what Circa tried to do was bring all of that together with a very factual and very resonant way of looking at the media. So instead of all the fuzz and buzz around it, they were more like Snopes, where they would verify these things and then give you a definitive record of what actually happened. So without fluff, without emotion, and that's actually why they failed. In fact, one article from The Verge says that Circa did very little original journalism. So they always were after the headline, right? And then, of course, they were cold and rational at a time when journalism was becoming more entertaining and emotional. So you had Hoodline, you had all these great blogs that were out there. This was just too on the nose. It was not in the line with what people expected. They wanted people to tell stories. Again, this is the business we are in. We are in the storytelling business. And Circa failed at it. They had a great product, but they failed at the warm and fuzzy. They didn't give the people what they wanted, and that's why they failed. So that's enough about the past. That's where we've been. And that's part of where we are too. But let me talk about one opportunity specifically, and I mentioned this to Richard before too, is that coders actually love writers. And if you all here are in Silicon Valley, you'll know that coders are kind of the lifeblood, much like a factory worker is in Detroit. Developers and engineers are kind of that to Silicon Valley. But there's so many opportunities for writers, especially technical writers and content writers like yourself, to actually get in the game. How? Well, let me show you something. So this is a site called GitHub. Some of you are probably already very, very, very familiar. And what you can see over to the left is the top 10 trending projects, where you'll see a bunch of different projects that really are the top 10 open source projects, meaning that people all around the world are working on these things. Hundreds of people are liking them. They're being upvoted. They're being worked on consistently. Now, with all of that busy work, there is no one minding the store, meaning that when things change, there's not adequate enough documentation to keep that process going, to keep really good engineers thinking that this piece of code is attractive. And I think that's where an opportunity lies right now. And the reason I say that coders love writers is because engineers hate writing documentation. They hate it. They absolutely loathe it. But if you can team up and you can be a technical writing power couple where they write the code and you write the implementation and you tell people about it and you put on your marketing hat one day and say, well, here's the actual thing that we're doing and here's why it's important. That's a thing that engineers need all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. If you look at an example over here to your right, you'll see some kind of weird grammar. Welcome, 3 things you ought to know first. Obviously we need a little bit of tailoring, right? And then, just a lot of stuff. You can't hit the ground running with this. You can't be a beginner and look at this. And that's one thing that engineers, specifically software engineers, need. They need new people that are just getting into software engineering. They need the communication to be clear and concise enough and easy enough to where people are attracted to getting into these projects. And so that's an opportunity there. One other area, and we're talking about the future, right? We want to be ahead of time, not behind it, right? And so there's 2 products out here in the market that are actively, and I mean actively, hiring folks to train their conversational UI. Now, what does that mean? So if you've ever went to a website and you see something like here, where you have a little chat bot, where it sometimes feels real, it feels like you're really talking to a person, that is conversational UI. So a quick example of that would be something like you go to a website that sells hot dogs and you say, and you type in the chat box and you say, I'm looking for a 6-inch on a bun with sesame seeds. Now, an actual computer will have no idea what you're talking about, but a human would. And so what these humans do, writers like yourself would do, is write scripts, literally write scripts where the responses or the expected responses will mimic what an actual human will tell another human. And this has helped countless companies like Bank of America. As you can see, there's these 2 companies. Jasper has worked with all these big companies, Airbnb, et cetera, because the cost of support, the cost of having an actual person live around the world all the time is astronomical. So we have to kind of train technology to behave like humans, but they'll never be human. And that's where they still need human intervention as well. So we need things to speak human to us all the time. That's the key thing that I wanted to tell you, is that despite all these changes in technologies, remember, it's always going to be speak human to me. And that is really the tip of the iceberg. Once we start realizing that people will always need this, we will never, ever, as writers, as content creators, as storytellers, be out of the loop when technology or any other change happens globally. Thank you again for your time.
Very good.
Sorry, I didn't have a time limit. I apologize if I went over.
No, you were well within our usual. Thank you very much. And presumably people have questions.
I do
another 20 minutes.
Sure, go for it.
I got a little bit lost.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we share your screen again and go back about 3 slides? Right when you started talking about GitHub, my ears kind of perked, and then I wasn't quite clear on what you were saying. And I guess the basic question is, who's hiring for this stuff?
Yeah, that's the key, right? Is you know, we all need to, you know, pay our bills. But what this means is, like with GitHub, these are open source projects here, right? That means that the public can see them and they can contribute to them. And some of these actually end up going commercial. WordPress is probably one of the biggest ones. So what they do is basically they write free software for the world. And the thing within the engineering community is that they get accolades and they're known. They can go to speaking gigs paid speaking gigs all over the world because they actually have done something that contributed to code all around the world. So it's kind of a long-term play. But if the skills that you have, you want them to be present and relevant for this day and age, this is just one avenue. It's not the only avenue, but it's one avenue where you could literally go to this and say, I'm going to tune up this language here, and the community will support you. It's like an open document that you can download, modify, make it better, and contribute back. And you are now a contributor to an open source project that's seen worldwide by millions.
Yeah, and when do I get to go to the bank?
Well, you know, that's up to you and how you leverage your brand, because you gotta have your own brand, right? You gotta do what you're doing, and you have to be known for doing what you're doing. Content right now, content writing is so crucial. So you going and contributing to something like this, I can give you actually an example of two people that have went to open source projects like this, and now they're updating the blogs or they're doing these things. And most of it is volunteer effort. Don't get me wrong. There is some money when they're asked to go speak or they're flown somewhere, or, you know, there's some accolades there. But yeah, going to the bank, it's hard to say. The big thing is the content, the user generated content. That's where a lot of people are making money in the content play right now. That is where I see a lot of people making a ton of money, not a little, a ton of money.
Okay, I'm still missing something. I'll let someone else ask a question or answer mine if you can translate.
Tony, I think I can jump in here.
Thank you.
Other speakers at our STC chapter have talked about this, and they say that writing procedures and things, or whatever technical writing is needed for GitHub projects, is a good way for people new to the field to build up their portfolios to show potential employers to help them get real jobs. Yeah, this is volunteer, and so that's one way it can be of value to someone. It may not be as much value to me or you.
Okay.
Yeah, and the time you spend sprucing it up, I mean, look, I'll be honest, it's really about adding something that was not there previously. And then that, as was mentioned by Joe, that is a stepping stone to a bigger opportunity, obviously, because it's something you can put on your resume and say, hey, I contributed to this open source project. And they're like, what? Are you a coder? No, I'm a technical writer. I love this project, and I did this because now it's seen all over the world, which means your phone and your email will be, you know, bombarded by people all over the world, because they'll look to you to modify it, and then you'll be the source that everyone goes to.
Sounds like time to me, not bank. And
well, one of our members got a job with Amazon, for example, after starting on an open source project.
Okay.
And
yeah,
and
Gail,
someone got one on Facebook, right?
Yeah, Gail Naylor did that too. She went,
yeah,
open source company for 6 months or so, and then developed skills, and Facebook hired her.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of it is going to be craft work, you know, just working on your craft. I mean, if you talk to a boxer and they say, and, you know, you ask them, when do they get paid? They get paid every day, because if they don't work on their craft every day, they won't get paid to pay the fight, you know, to do the fight. So it's really about that everyday conditioning, so where when the opportunity comes, you're ready and you're not behind the 8 ball.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, Curtis, because one of the problems that I'm constantly running up against is that, I mean, I pretty much know what these companies are after because I can see it in the JDs that they send to me. And, you know, I want to be able to do some of these things. Okay. But the problem is I don't really have the time to do it because I'm too busy working at this job. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And we know there's an age-old proverb in any of these tools that you use. If you don't use it, you lose it. So
Yes.
the only way I'm gonna be able to do any type of coding for anybody, I have to learn how to code. So and that's like I said, it's almost like I'm caught in a catch-22 here.
Yeah, well, I mean, with this, you don't actually have to know how to code. You just need to be able to talk with engineers and they can tell you exactly like how it works. And your job is more of a translator. You're making it human readable. You're taking the tech brain out of it and saying, if I'm grandma, how am I going to get involved in this project, or how am I going to download this code? Just give it to me straight. 1, 2, 3.
There's quite a bit of variation in that, though. I have this job interview on Monday that's with a company that I read the job description, and it wasn't even like they wanted a technical writer who understood software development. They wanted a programmer who could write. And the recruiter said, well, you know, they've kind of let go of that because they can't find anybody.
Yep.
And but that you run into that a lot, you know, with as both in content strategy and UX writing content and in technical writing, especially technical writing, where, you know, it's the old joke, basket weaving company needs technical writer, must be expert in basket weaving. Completely misunderstands what a technical writer does. He must be expert in technical writing. You know, that's the thing.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing. It's you know, and you'll see this a lot in jobs. They're looking for a superstar, but you got to realize, like, superstars come with money and time, and it's never going to be a pure, because they're trying to justify it to their bosses. They're looking for that all-in-one person, and that's where a lot of that comes from. It's never going to be because they want all these things. It's because they need to have a solid rec that they can put on the website that is not for a lightweight role. You know, they need to have clearance. They need to have an actual budget for that. So that's why you see some of these positions front loaded, but they may be looking for that. But what they really need is an engineer to sit in his chair and do some documentation. And they don't know it yet, but that's what they hate the fact that they have to hire a writer to come in and do that. But yeah, that's a niche. That's a niche. And, you know, I would even encourage you, if we're talking true entrepreneurial here, I would encourage you to just start your own collective and say, hey, Apple, you know what? You guys got all this code out there and no one's writing documentation for it. Hire us. We'll consult with you. And, you know, you guys pay us $300 an hour and we're good to go. We'll come in twice a week, do your documentation and leave. How's that sound? You know, and it can be a general team, because none of these companies have someone that's dedicated to that. None of them, not one of them. I can assure you, I've worked at 3 out of the 5 FANG companies, and not one of them has that role at all.
Well, I like, you know, I like where you're directing it, but there is the other side of the spectrum with these companies too, because they have their hiring process. You know, it's like, yeah, I would love to be able to go into, say, Google or Apple or Oracle and say, oh yeah, by the way, you have this code and no one's documented. I would love to do this for you 4 days a week, whatever. But I know the moment I try to do that, the first thing they'll say, well, you need to go down to HR and talk to blah, 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 and you know, go through these steps. And by the way, we need you to climb that mountain next week. And then once you get to the top, we'll talk to you.
Yeah. And sometimes it does work that way, but, you know, going into it, knowing that there's going to be challenges, you're doing something different. And every time someone does something different within a space, it's always going to be a difficult climb up, but you'll learn so much about how to do it right and how to actually reach and resonate with folks. And you're going to be really good at it because you're a writer. So all of these things are not, they're legitimate concerns. but try to think optimistically, because a lot of times, you know, taking that risk that's just the name of the game, unfortunately. I wish there was no risk in it and companies knew this, but oftentimes I'll tell you what, at Media Monks, what we did, we would talk to Facebook, Instagram, etc. We would talk to all these crazy companies, and we would put together a pitch deck like what I showed you. And we would say, hey, here's your deficiency right here. Do you know that you can get this amount of efficiency if you actually went with us? And they'll say, well, what do you do? Well, you know what we do? We actually come in and document things. And any of these gaps that you have, they will be filled. And what we'll do is we'll volunteer 8 hours or 40 hours. And then from there, let's get to billing. Let's get to going. But, you know, it comes down to what you want out of the deal too, because you can be very entrepreneurial up front. And a lot of these doors will open if you're coming and saying, I require $50,000 up front, and it's going to take 6 months to sign a contract, all that good stuff, you know. But again, you're doing something different. It's always going to be risky for the first person through the door.
Okay, Curtis, one more question. I mean, I just put together a 63-page manual on how to build a successful customer service department, because I was in customer service for about 11 years. And I also knew that I was going to need some writing samples if I was going to go before a hiring manager. Now, I mean, to me, that's a pretty pagey sample. Okay, most of them, they won't only want, you know, something maybe 10 pages tops.
Will they even read it though?
What's that?
Will they even read it though?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I also have a 14-page one, and that one is a little bit more on the, you know, how-to manual on something basic. So which would you use?
I would use it. So I kind of look at the Hollywood script way, where, you know, in Hollywood, they have these script readers. And what they're doing is they're going through the first 5 to 10 pages. If it's any good, then they put it to the top of the pile. And then they dig a little deeper. They go past the first 5 pages. Then they're like, this is a pretty decent script. This is why it's so hard for writers to get gigs in Hollywood. It's a trial and error thing. Directors and talent, they're not reading scripts. They have script readers. So if you're compelling within that first couple pages, it's really about honing your craft. But if you need 15 pages to tell a story that you can tell in 5, it's just about being editorial at that point, in my opinion. Because people have less of a patience tolerance these days. And you almost have to, I'll actually give you let me give you a better piece of advice. So what I've noticed is these things called almost like a pictorial, right? So if you're thinking about social media, even there is on Twitter, they have these threaded posts where essentially you can write a post, you can write an entire blog post in a series of tweets, right? And people will follow. People will actually follow, and they'll be like, oh, here's part 1 of the story. And if part 1 of the story is compelling enough, they will continue to go down the rabbit hole. I think you have to look at your content play and your resume samples as much the same. Give them the tease, set it up, you know, make sure it has its proper act 1, and then make sure that they're salivating for act 2 and 3.
Okay.
Things have changed a lot over time in that regard. And it used to be the advice was you never actually leave writing samples with the person who's interviewing you. You don't give them to them in advance. You present them at the interview, and you lead them through them. And nowadays, everybody expects they're going to receive some sort of writing sample in advance electronically, and they're going to go through it on their own. And that's just an entirely different situation.
Yeah. I mean, it may just be that the process by which they go through, because we also are in Silicon Valley, and many people have adapted this 6-7 person interview cycle. And a lot of hiring, they're looking for the safest possible candidate. They're not looking for anyone that's going to be outside the lines of that. They're looking for the safest possible candidate. Can they do the job? Can they do it well enough to where, you know, they're not going to get power hungry, and then they're also going to not blow deadlines either.
So you're actively working right now in and around Silicon Valley, right, Mr.
Right.
Pope? Okay, so how many gray heads do you see as you go and navigate through these? Because I'm looking at the people from the STC who are here, other than the Richards. And okay, so my hair is purple today, but tomorrow maybe green, you know. It's covering a bunch of gray. I'm as gray as all these other folks on here. How many of them do you see writing right now?
You know, what's surprising is that I've actually worked in the past year, I've worked with 3 content writers that are over the age of 55.
Oh, gracious.
Yeah. And
so's my daughter.
I'm taking a wild guess.
So's my daughter.
I'm taking a wild guess at their age. So don't.
You know, for us, 55 is a youngin'.
Yeah.
Yeah, whippersnappers.
But you know, all of you all, I wouldn't, you know, I wish I could tell you much more with much more confidence that, you know, don't process that and don't worry about it. But I know it's a concern. My thing to say is that if you still have music in you, make sure that everyone can hear it. That's my real advice, because I'm young, but I still feel like, man, you know, there's so much I've done and there's still so much I want to do. And I just feel like I'm going to explode sometimes if I don't really give it my best effort. And I know you all kind of have this talent that I don't have, because I'm going to be honest with you. I think like a writer. I may speak like it, but I hate the act of writing. I hate the typing part of it. Even though I'm a engineer.
So do all of us.
Yeah. Oh, really?
No.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'm on the other side of it, man. I love writing. I love writing. I tell you, I've told the STC group here before, if I could find a company that would pay me $70K a year, I would leave this company as fast as I could blink.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's, let me ask you this. Is anybody writing about things that they're interested in currently outside of just for a job? Like, is anyone writing for fun?
I used to have a sports blog, and eventually it migrated into a radio show, and then it migrated to a podcast. It was up in San Francisco. It was called allbayareasports.com radio show. We ran it for 3 years. But it started off as a sports blog. I did about roughly, I want to say 133 posts.
Wow.
And I wrote about all the Bay Area sports teams here locally in the Bay Area. But yeah, it migrated. Once the pandemic hit, we could no longer do the radio show. So we migrated to a podcast. The podcast, I think we did roughly 73 shows.
Wow.
Yeah. But I still enjoy writing. I still enjoy writing about sports. And I think I'm going to go ahead and start again, because I just love writing. I do. I love everything about it. And I enjoy watching sports. And yeah, so that's kind of what I'm into right now.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the thing too. It's like, I see you all, your talent as writers. You know, I'll tell you, if I had to do, like, I do what I love for work too. And the thing that bums me out is that I have to do it for work, you know? So it's kind of like, you also don't want to get into the habit of where you're kind of shackled to your passion a little bit, and you only have to do it for work. Because if you love what you're doing, then, you know, let that be the focus, but let it live on its own apart from your actual craft of what you're doing. You know, I mean, I'll tell you, I love developing mobile apps, but my core work at work is a program manager for a bunch of different apps, from the web to all these other things, right? So I have to figure out what the balance of that is, you know, because I can't always do what I love, but I will definitely be adjacent to it if I can.
I'm doing some writing for my church right now. But that's doing policies and procedures, which is some of what I have been paid for to do in the past. And I saw a need there, so I offered to do some of that. I also, for my fun, with a group of seniors, started out as a little writing club at the senior center, actually. And we're still getting together over Zoom and writing together. Someone brings a prompt and we do a little bit of writing and share it. So yeah, I do enjoy writing, and I enjoy clarifying things and making things clear to people. I'm the one that started out as a programmer. My first corporate job was applications programming, as they called it back then. And I gravitated to the lower paying writing because I was passionate about explaining things clearly to people. And there was money in that, as it turns out, but who knew, you know, just dumb luck being in the right place at the right time, I guess.
That's great. That is really good. One other thing I wanted to show you all real quick is, so about it's probably, wow, I can't believe it's been that long actually. So probably close to around 2.5 years ago, I met a young woman who actually had something really interesting going on, where she had, I don't know why this thing won't share now. Here we go. She has the startup, it's called Script Swap. And it was really interesting. I almost invested in this company. She wanted me to be the CTO of this company. And I honestly did not have I didn't have the time. My time was not my own, but I really loved her company. This is Melissa, by the way. I'm not sure who this woman is. I think she's her co-founder now. She may be CTO actually. But what this is it actually was interesting to me. What she does is, you know, all those like sales contracts that people have, like, let's say you go and buy some really high dollar amounted thing, and you get a big receipt that has a bunch of legal jargon on it. Well, what this does is it actually shows you, for different companies, it shows you like what that actually means in human readable terms.
Yeah. It's kind of a good
we
idea.
can do that.
Exactly. So like, you know, but the interesting thing about this woman is she raised $9 million, and you know, it was crazy because I said, you have $9 million. What do you need from me? And she was saying, I need an innovator. I need someone to think outside of what I have as far as a vision. And what I did was I said, well, look, I'll help you find a CTO. And it looks like she found one, Caroline, but she had a whole other team before when I met her. So it looks like there may not, this was her whole team before. So and a lot of these people were writers, mind you. And look at the average age, right? So it's not like because you're of a certain age, you have no value. This is like, it's something you have to figure out, like, where do you want to go from now? And find the opportunity. Don't let age be the thing that defines what you do. Let it be the thing that exudes as to why you do what you do well. Because
at a certain age, you have your value proposition is different. My value proposition as an older writer is a lot different from a 20-something. You know, I don't bring the energy, and I don't stay up all night most of the time and things like that. But I think I've accumulated a certain amount of wisdom over the years. And so when I get involved in all aspects, and I work for a startup, so it's I work directly for the CEO. And so when I have something when I see what's going on, I always have opinions, and they derive from 50 years or more in the business, and so it's a different value proposition that we bring. It's not the same as somebody who's just out of school and eager to write code.
Yeah, I think
want to write anything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that there's oftentimes like a huge gap, right? So I deal with I'm kind of, I guess I'm middle aged now, but you know, just thinking about like how many 20-year-olds I deal with and people just coming out of school, there's a lack of understanding of like how to build a career. There's a lack of understanding about what they actually want to do. They're not sure about whether this is even the path to do, you know? But I will say the thing that they excel at that we can all learn from is that they know how to monetize and make money off of being who they are uniquely.
Yes.
That's one thing that I feel if I was smart enough in my 20s, I would have probably bet even more on myself then. Because when you don't have a mortgage and you don't have a wife and you don't have any of these things, you have a little bit more freedom to, you know, be expressive and whatnot, or even to just, you know, do things without a lot of consequence and then burn it down and start all over. But, you know, after you've done it for a while, you have a lot to lose. But you never lose what you don't put in the middle. And I think that all of you have something specific where you do have that experience. You do have that wisdom. Or how can you leverage it? That's a big question. How can you leverage it? It may not be writing. Maybe it is, again, we're telling stories here. Maybe it is advising younger people at the start of their careers on how to have a longer career as a writer or even just in general. I think that's severely lacking from our workforce now.
And to your point, I tell you something, Curtis, I think you're absolutely correct, because I mean, I kind of see, you know, some of, because, you know, I have a pretty, you know, I won't say enormous, but a pretty good sized LinkedIn account. And, you know, I'm getting a lot of calls from recruiters, and, but I'm also noticing too, I see all the different individuals who are out there, and the youth, they seem to have kind of a more of an edge to get into these places because of their youth. Okay, because the companies know that, hey, look, we can get 5 to 10 years out of this person, and whereas they look at somebody like me, as the young lady was saying a minute ago, who's up in age, and they think, well, you know what, I don't know how many years I'm gonna get out of this person, you know. So so they do kind of have an edge when you talk about their youth, but they don't have, as Richard was pointing out, they don't have a lot of wisdom, and they may not have a lot of experience. And I think that's where we have the edge. Okay, I think that's where, you know, like you said, you know, if we leverage what our value is to these companies, then they'll probably be a little bit more open to say, yeah, we'll go ahead and take you on.
Yeah, and you know, there's ways to finesse that too.
I'll clean that up in a minute.
I think that there's so many ways to finesse that, but I mean, I'd love to give you more concrete understanding of just exactly how you can execute your plan. But I don't have the same experiences, but I also, I'm at that point in my career where I'm like, well, you know, this next gig or this next job kind of has to be it. Or, you know, I go into consulting full time, you know, or it may be that, you know, it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine about 2 months ago, and he runs a flooring company, and all he does is floors. And I said, well, he's 26 years old. I thought he was much older than that, but he was 26 years old. I asked him, I said, how did you get into this? And you have so many clients and all. He said, oh, this was my grandfather's job. He's still at the office doing stuff, but I run the day to day. I go out and talk to the customers, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I said, so your grandfather's like the godfather behind all this stuff, and you're just a foot soldier. You're just a foot soldier, right? And he's like, yeah, exactly. Now, see, I mean, that situation too can be highly leveraged from the way you all are looking at it too, where you may have to find a young crop of upstarts to execute your vision, right? And just say, look, you know what? I'm the brains here. You're just the muscle, and make it happen. I don't know, but there's so many ways that you can finesse this. But, you know, if your goal is to continue to make a living off of it, You may not be the vessel, but you may be the brains behind it in my aspect of it.
All right, Curtis, I'm going to stop the recording here.
Oh, yeah.
And